I found out that during the course of World War II, something like 60 million people were displaced from their homes. 60 million.
People.
And that number boggled my mind. And then I thought about a lot of the books I'd read about World War II and that, that were great and stuff. And I realized that most of them were about families or, that were involved in the resistance or actual battlefield commanders, that kind of thing. And I finally asked the question, what about the people who are just trying to get out of the way, right? They've got no interest in this war and they're just trying to get out of the way. So they go through this horrendous journey, right? And they do face things that we've never faced in the United States. And I think it makes them both. It makes them tougher and more resilient, but at the same time, to totally survive it and come out with meaning, they have to be more compassionate.
Welcome to Book Reporter Talks To, where our guest today is Mark Sullivan. Been a long time reader of Mark's books. I think I read everything that he's written, and that's 18 novels at this point. In 2017, Mark wrote Beneath a Scarlet Sky, which was his first historical fiction novel, and it became a worldwide success, and it garnered much acclaim. We're going to be talking today about his latest historical fiction, The Last Green Valley, which I think will touch readers the same way that Scarlet Sky did. And yes, it too is a Book Reporter Bets On selection. Welcome, Mark. It's so good to see you.
Great to see you, Carol. Thank you for having me.
Oh, so excited about this. I confess that as I read the end of The Last Green Valley, I was reading with tears, many, many tears. The story was that powerful and that emotional. And it was kind of thing where I just read it for a couple of hours and I just didn't move. And when I got up, I was like, I should really call Mark right now. And I was like, no, I'm crying too hard. And This story came to you in a very unexpected way. But before we talk about that, I want to wind back the clock to when you got the idea for Beneath the Scarlet Sky. And here's what I remember. You and I were in an event, I think it was an International Thrillers Conference. We were in the back of the room at the cocktail party. And you were saying, I got to lead an idea. And I'm going to go to Italy. And if I can have this man talk to me, I think I have a really big story. And I remember exactly what I was standing when I said that. And I'm trying to remember, what year was that? Was that 15?
16.
16.
No. 6.
Really?
Yeah, 2006.
That long ago.
Is when I had the story. Yeah.
And I remember you said, if we could do this, you were on your way to Italy, I think like the next day.
Sounds about right. I went over there a bunch of times, so it was right in that thing, and I knew, I think, that if it even panned out half of what I'd been told, that it was a fantastic story. I just had no idea that the dimensions of it, for example, would cause me to have to become a different kind of writer. Right? I had to learn how to be a different kind of writer to write that book. And I had to take those skills and things I learned doing Beneath the Scarlet Sky and apply them again in The Last Green Valley, because it is, also an untold story of World War II. And how I got the story was as odd as how I got Beneath. A lot of people were saying after Beneath came out that I would never find another story like it, that had this impact on people. And I kind of said, I don't think I went through what I went through to write that book, and if I wasn't supposed to write another one. And sure enough, all these story ideas started firing at me. People were sending them through my website and getting my email and sending them or writing letters. And some of them were really good and incredibly intriguing. But I realized that I had to have some kind of filter. What was I looking for? And I went back and really thought about Beneath, and I wrote 4 words down that, actually 5 words. I wrote down that it was moving, inspiring, healing, and potentially transformative, right? Depending on who the reader is, it could be transformative. So I went looking for a story with those kinds of attributes. And I'm hearing some that have 2 or 3 of them, but none of them that have the 4. And it gets to be November of 17, so it's about 5-6 months after Beneath comes out. And I'm doing a presentation on Pinot Lella in the book at the Noontime Rotary in my hometown, Bozeman, Montana. And this retired dentist comes up afterwards and he says, "Do you know the Martel family?" And I said, "Do you mean the construction people?" Because they have this big construction company in Bozeman. And he said, "Yeah." He said, "The entire time I was reading Beneath a Scarlet Sky, I was thinking about the story of how they came to America." And he said, "You have to hear it." So 2 days later, I have the address for Bill Martel, who's the guy who co-founded the construction company, and I put it in the nav, and it's like 2 miles from my house, right? And I go down, and it tells me to take a left into this older neighborhood, and I'm getting this strange feeling, and I'm not putting it together. And I get to the driveway, Bill's driveway, and I get out, and it dawns on me, I'm not 250 yards from where I heard the story of Pinolella for the first time. And I was just like, okay. And I went to the door and knocked on it, and Bill's this, big gregarious guy. He was almost 80, but very sharp, remembered, just about everything he needed to tell me. And his brother was sharp too. And Walter, and he starts telling me this story. And I know within an hour that I'm telling this thing, because it's hitting every button. It's got this incredible adventure aspect to it. It pushes human beings to the point of breaking, like almost constantly, and yet they overcome it. And they overcome it through the power of love and family and a dogged faith in the dreams they keep in their heart. And I was like, I'm in, right? So I end up going to because basically what the story is for the listener is, it features this refugee family in a horse-drawn covered wagon trying to outrun the Soviet Red Army while under the protection of Nazi SS officers who were involved in the Holocaust. It is harrowing, haunting, morally complex, and ultimately triumphant story. And I just know people will be hooked on the family, because they just came to life in a way that I didn't expect. I mean, I was trying, but they really did come to life, and for me and for a lot of people who've read the book so far.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, I found that I didn't know anything about this part of World War II. I didn't know anything about people. They're called ethnic Germans, which is what they were. Right. They had lived in Germany and then moved to the Ukraine. I knew about the brutality of Stalin and his regime. I mean, I totally got that. But the fact that these people are fleeing the Red Army into the arms of the Nazis, and the Nazis are the good guys, was like, wow. So let's start with, what are ethnic Germans? What does that exactly mean?
Yeah, so basically, the Martel family, going back 4 or 5 generations before Emil and Adeline, were living in Germany. And they were tremendously good. This is like the late 1700s, early 1800s. And they were very good at farming vast quantities of land for grain, wheat, bread. And at the time, Catherine the Great understood that Russia depended on the Ukraine for the same kind of wheat, except the serfs there were not as sophisticated. They didn't have the kind of yields that the Germans knew how to do. So she went to them with this interesting proposition, right? Or she made it a thing where they could come, they would leave Germany, move to what is now Ukraine. She would give them land and 30 years without taxation. And they formed these colonies, these remote colonies in the rural area. And that's exactly what they did. And they farmed for, over a century, and had a good living. They spoke German, but they also spoke Russian. They kept their culture alive, but they weren't in contact with Germany. They get cut off over a century. So the Bolshevik Revolution happens, and very quickly things go bad for them, right? Because they're ethnic Germans, and it's post-World War I. There's a lot of animosity towards that Germany, even though they haven't had contact with them probably in 3 generations. And then they get thrown off their land. Then the Ukraine gets starved by Joseph Stalin. They both experience it as children and young adults. And this series of just brutality on their lives under tyrants continues until 1941, when Adolf Hitler invades. And of course, Hitler has the same idea as Catherine the Great: get a hold of Ukraine, and you got this big breadbasket, right? And he wants the breadbasket for Greater Germany, his vision of a Greater Germany. So one of the first things they do after the Wehrmacht comes in and occupies is they go to the ethnic Germans. They say, "You want your land back?" And they say, "Well, yeah, we want our land back." And so the Martels go back to their, ancestral property and start farming again. And, with a couple of noted things that happen while they're there, life's pretty good for them. They eat like they know where their next meal is coming from. They have their land back. They're very much cut off, though, from what's going on all over the country, because it's an extremely rural place. I've been there. And so then what happens is Stalingrad, and and the Red Army begins to turn the tide against the Germans, just like the Allies are starting to, getting prepared to turn the tide against Hitler in the West. But it's happening here, sooner, and it gets kind of crazy, because they have to make a decision at some point who they are when all this stuff and the Dnieper River falls, and we've got a whole retreating German army, a whole advancing Russian army, and these SS officers who know who all the ethnic Germans are come to their house and make a proposition. Do you stay and wait for the bear to return? Now, the Martels have been persecuted under Stalin. Her father was taken to the Gulag and never returned. His father was sent to the Gulag and came back a broken man. So they know what it's going to be like under them. But do they want to run with these Nazis that they've grown to despise because of what they know of what they did during the Holocaust? So it becomes very morally complex, because there's no good answer in that, right? And I think that's what makes it interesting, is there's no good answer. And they make the decision that between themselves that they're going to run with the Nazis because they vowed to protect them. And the first chance they get, they're going to run for the Western Allies. And they're going to try for freedom for the first time in their life. So in effect, they trade one tyrant for another, right? And away they go. Yeah. Because it suits their purposes.
And there's no news is not plentiful at this time. So they really don't know. They're going on rumor. They're hearing the Red Army's coming. They hear, but the Germans are there, and it's safer to go with who you know than who you don't know at this point. The family's traveling first with a wagon pulled by horses, and then later they're pulling a cart. How far did they, and I know there's a map behind you, but how far did they actually travel from the Ukraine to the end of their journey?
That would be Lodz, Poland, and that was like 1,500 miles. They're in the wagon for probably 1,000 of it, and then they switch and they have to download again, right? They have to take just what they need and they put it into the cart, and the cart goes on a train, and the train goes north to Lodz, Poland, which I'd never heard of this until I started researching the book, was like the Ellis Island of the Third Reich. It was where they were basically accepting in these Russian Germans to become part of the Greater Germany. What you don't know is why, right? It's a mystery. Why does the SS want to protect them? And I don't want to give away everything, but it's horrific. And when they have to face this, it's sort of stunning. Then they have to keep facing aspects of Germany's Aryan theories. And I can tell basically that there were people in the German hierarchy who thought that they were the purest Aryan blood left on earth because they had lived in isolation like that. And they get to Lodz, and all of a sudden they realize that they're being clothed in the clothes of Jews that were taken to the concentration camps. And they're being given housing. And the housing belonged to the Jews who were taken to the concentration camp, like literally weeks before they got there.
Mm-hmm.
And this all dawns on them slowly, you know, and they have to, one thing after another, they have to come to grips with and understand that they have to deal with these facts that are part of their new reality, which is constantly shifting.
Mm-hmm. And it's, okay, we're going, and I also think that they're saying to them, you need to prove your German heritage. And they had a Bible,
Yes.
and they had all kinds
Yes.
of paperwork. And every step along the way, you were constantly proving yourself again to be allowed to go into Germany and to be allowed
Right.
to be part of this. And there's this
Right.
German general, it's Emil Hausmann, who is brutal, and he's overseeing part of their trek. And he's got
Right.
this past with Emil. He's got this past.
Yes.
And that you're parsing out to the readers. Like, we know
Yes.
something happened between them. We don't know what. And was his character real, or was he a composite of a bunch of Nazis?
No, he was a real character. His name was Major Emil Hausmann. There's, I mean, to be honest, there's no evidence, that hard evidence that they met,
Mhm.
but there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that they did meet. Okay.
Mhm.
So in the book, they meet and they know each other. Hausmann, it turns out that the final solution part of the Holocaust does not start to be implemented until Hitler invades Russia, right? They were putting people in concentration camps. People were certainly getting killed if they were, you know, outspoken or political or what have you. But Heinrich Himmler's final solution had not been implemented until they sweep into Russia in this thing called Operation Barbarossa. And the arm of that attack that came through Romania and Moldova and into Ukraine was followed immediately by members of this group called the Einsatzgruppen. And they were basically firing squads, sophisticated firing squads.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that a few weeks before this invasion, Heinrich Himmler asked to witness a firing squad execution. And when he did, he was so sickened that he vomited, and he made this decree. And the decree is pivotal to the book, and I don't want to give it away.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But it's a fact. It's a historical fact. There's documentation about it. And I found that fascinating. And then I found fascinating some stuff that was in the Nuremberg trials about the Einsatzgruppen and about Ukraine. And while I was doing my research, I interviewed the Martel's granddaughter, and she had heard from Adeline relatively late in Adeline's life that when they got back to that farm, in their ancestral farm, very soon after, like September of 1941, he has to go and get roofing supplies for their house because, you know, he's building a home for him. And it's supposed to be like a day and a half trip, and he takes off. And he comes back 4.5 days later, and he's as rattled as she's ever seen him. And she asks what happened, and he said he was held by the Nazis and forced to bury Jews, and he would never talk about it again. And so I had to basically go all the way through the story, because I also learned that there were some ethnic Germans who willingly participated in the Holocaust, only to later claim that they buried Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for, you know, a panicked 3 or 4 weeks, I was desperately, you know, researching everything I could, and I found nothing that linked Mr. Martel to anything whatsoever. And I looked hard, because I was vetting. I knew what I was looking for and why I was looking for it, and it wasn't there.
So when war ends, there are consequences that are far beyond the numbers on the battlefield. People have lost their homes due to the bombing or forced migration. We've not fought a war on our soil. We've not fought a world war on our soil. And I was thinking a lot about that when I was reading this, because we really don't understand like what it was like to lose your home, to be out walking on the streets or whatever. We just don't understand what that is like. So, and it's also this moment where death is surrounding them on an ongoing basis. And thinking about our own lives, we've rarely, if ever, been going through that same kind of experience. And
Correct.
I'm trying to figure out, does this make people more hardened later in life or more compassionate? And what do you see?
That's a great question. Let me just back up 1 second. I'm going to come right to that because you commented on something that was part of my initial interest in this. I found out that during the course of World War II, something like 60 million people were displaced from their homes. 60 million.
People.
And that number boggled my mind. And then I thought about a lot of the books I'd read about World War II and that, that were great and stuff. And I realized that most of them were about families or, that were involved in the resistance or actual battlefield commanders, that kind of thing. And I finally asked the question, what about the people who were just trying to get out of the way, right? They've got no interest in this war and they're just trying to get out of the way. So they go through this horrendous journey, right? And they do face things that we've never faced in the United States. And I think it makes them both. It makes them tougher and more resilient, but at the same time, to totally survive it and come out with meaning, they have to be more compassionate. They have to. It has to go inward and their humanity has to grow. If they hold on to the bitterness of the event, it'll eat them up. You'll know changing it and it will eat them alive. And they spend a life that has no fulfillment, no triumph, nothing, right? But if the person becomes more compassionate, learns more about themselves and how they relate to another human in the process of going through this unbelievably difficult ordeal, that makes for interesting people and it makes for great storytelling, if in my opinion. It was fertile ground when I went in there.
Oh, completely. And, at one point, Emil's saying some secrets are not to be shared. Some memories are meant to be forgotten. And I'm wondering if he was really able to do that. And I feel like he was able to parse out that was then, this is now is good, but look where we came from to get to where we are. That's what the feeling I was getting.
Sure. But remember, Emil begins the book having lost his faith in God. And Adeline is still very much holding on to her faith in God and a better place, this place they call the beautiful Green Valley that kind of becomes like a metaphor for what they're searching for. And she holds on to it. And Emil, when he says that, right, it's part of this armor he's put up because he has lost his faith. He believes the only thing he can believe in is himself and his ability to keep his family alive and safe. That's it. That's the extent of it. And through the course of the book, of course, he's met with challenge upon challenge upon challenge upon challenge that he meets, taking this philosophy forward until a certain point. And then he's broken. And he has to find his faith in order to, he has to give new meaning back to everything he's gone through so that he can effectively become a different person, right? And Adeline, she's a person of great faith who finally breaks herself and has her moments of doubt and disbelief and bitterness until something happens that changes it again. But Emil comes out of we'll talk about it, I'm sure, of the prison camp when he escapes. He's a fundamentally different person than the man who goes in. He, as boys have described to me, he goes in a man who tried never to be noticed, never to demonstrate any kind of ambition or wanting better for his family and himself, because under Stalinism, that alone could get you sent to the gulag, right? That you aspired to be better than someone else. And he goes in and something happens to him in the crucible of the prison camp. And he exits a completely different person spiritually.
And yes, and it's like at that moment, it's like, wait, who am I? Who have I really become? You know, it's also interesting to me, they were not that old when they were making this trek. Like Adeline turns 29 on this trek. And you think about people we know who are 29 that are,
Yeah.
you know, doing these kinds of things. Did their youth help them at all? I mean, he was older than she was, but did that help them because they could be a little bit more resilient?
I think so. Oh, yeah, for sure. It helped them. They were young, they were strong. They both had jobs that required labor.
Mhm.
So they were physically tough people to begin with. That definitely helps. But, you know, the 20,000 plus people die on this trek. It's not
Mhm.
just them. There's like 120 to 130,000 on the trek. I think I've seen as high as 140. And 20,000 of them die
Mhm.
because of its rigors, which, you know, that's pretty tough odds. And they certainly have been prepared by the struggles of their early life
Mhm.
to meet the challenge of this journey,
Mhm.
right? But it's almost as if, and they remark upon it, it's like one challenge kind of prepared them for the next and the next and the next and the next, and they never stopped moving forward, especially Adeline, toward that dream of a beautiful green valley,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and that's the metaphor. There's the significance in it. She keeps looking for it. And for readers, it's sewing the story together. I was noting today how many places it comes up. And the boys are going, Mom, is this the Green Valley? And she's going, nope, this isn't it. We have to keep going. We have to keep going. And in these young children, remember, we haven't really talked about the fact they're traveling with these two young boys. They've lost a
Right.
child. They have these two
Yes.
children.
Yes.
There are a relative who has children who loses the children on this journey, but she's
Yes.
constantly looking at this. Did you know that the Green Valley was going to be this resounding theme right from the start?
No. Actually, my editor saw it very early in the process when I was describing. I, I have to go back and confirm it with her, but I believe I wrote about this folio of paintings that Adeline finds at Mrs. Cantor's house, and how there's this painting of this beautiful green valley, and how when she finally gets to her green valley, it just blows her away
Mhm.
because it's so like the painting,
Mhm.
right? It's just stunning.
Yeah, she just sits there and goes, that's it. That's exactly what I
Yeah,
was picturing seeing. It was very, very
yeah,
moving.
yeah.
So it comes up over and over during the book. So I was just like, well, it's really sewing the story together because especially
Yeah.
when the boys are saying, Mom, is this it? And she's had a really rough day. And she goes, no, this isn't it. We just have to keep
Right.
on going. And to say that to these children. So let's
But
talk
she
about,
also says, a couple times, you know what? This is the green valley you're in today,
yes,
right?
enjoy the moment, be in this
Yeah.
moment, relish this moment, and then we're going to go on
Right.
for there. Tell us
Right.
about your research for this trip, because I remember when you were headed out to the Ukraine and you were headed
Sure.
out with the Martels. What was that
Yes.
journey like?
That was extraordinary. I had already done the legs from Moldova through Romania, Hungary, Czech Republic up, and I stopped up in there. So I went with Walter and Bill, and we flew to Kiev and then to Odessa. Odessa is in the southern part of what was called the Black Sea Germans. These colonies that were all the way north towards Kiev. And we found a guy who was an expert on these old colonies, and we rented a vehicle and we drove up one of the worst roads I've ever been on for about 7 hours to get to this place. And we get there, and I'm with a 78, 79-year-old man at that time, and Walter in his 80s, and we find it. I mean, we find their grandparents' house. It's still standing, and we find the ruins of their house. It's not there because somebody bought the land and did something, but they found the root cellar and they knew exactly where it was. They remembered, and they found the well because the well was a distinctive shape that their father had built. And for me to stand there knowing a lot of the story at this point, right? Understanding, and to see them like staring into space and obviously confronting the arc of their life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was extraordinary.
Right.
It really was. It was moving. Uh, it was inspirational to think that someone could have started, effectively under those conditions, not only abject poverty, but tyranny,
Mhm.
right? I mean,
Mhm.
and tyranny that's sort of hard to fathom in its relatively arbitrariness, okay? And to go all the way through this brutal journey, all the way
Mhm.
to get there, and then to happen what happened to them, to have this extraordinary life
Mhm.
in America, and then to go back,
Mhm.
with me was amazing. And the next day, I realized, because I wanted to go to this place, Poltava, which is where the prison camp was. And our guide tells me it's 13 hours and the road is worse in places. And I go, I can't do this to these guys, right? Because they were beaten up after this one day.
Mhm.
And so I decided I'm gonna rent charter a plane.
Mhm.
So I charter a little plane and we fly to Poltava and we get picked up. Range it, our guide ranges it, and we go to this museum that's standing. And the prison camp was basically a loosely put together. It's not like your traditional barbed wire thing.
Yeah.
These people were taken there under, armed guard, and it was a city of 300,000 that had been destroyed by Allied bombing, and they're told they got to rebuild the city, right?
Mhm.
2,300 men, and they're going to rebuild it block by block, right? Which is just preposterous. And there's all this disease that starts sweeping through the place,
Mhm.
right? I can't remember where I was going with this, but
But you're bringing
that,
them there. You're bringing them back to this place,
yes,
which
yeah.
they
So I
had
bring
not
them
been
back,
to, which was their dad's place,
never
not
been
them.
to,
Right.
right. It was where he was held, and the place was closed. We couldn't believe it. And we get out the back, and there's the museum director, and we talk to him, and he's like, well, they're doing a lot of construction in there, yada, yada. And then we tell him that Emil, one of the things he did to survive was gather scraps of lumber and sold it to the camp cooks.
Mhm.
And he said, my mother was one of those cooks. And all of a sudden we're in. And
Wow.
he takes us into the basement of the museum where uh, Emil was held with 600 other men. This is a big building, okay? And again, to be in this room with these two men, old men, confronting the place where their father was taken to the point of death,
Mhm.
basically,
Mhm.
and ruin, and life could have turned out wildly differently if he doesn't make a move. Mr. Martel doesn't make a move to escape that basement.
Mhm.
And to be there with the brothers when they confronted that was another one of these moments I will never forget in my
Mhm.
life. And I, because of that, I really got a sense of what Emil Martel had to have gone through.
Mhm.
Just by seeing it reflected in their sons, in his son's eyes, I got it. And I
Mhm.
was lucky that there were all sorts of photographs of the prisoners, not Mr. Martel, but
Mhm.
actually working to rebuild the hospital where he did, and
Mhm.
working to rebuild the museum. So it all came alive on that trip with them. And then Walter and I, Bill had to go back to the States, and Walter and I flew to Berlin and drove to Lodz, Poland, and figured out where they had been and where they were processed, and all those scenes that take place when they go through the equivalent of Ellis Island into the Third Reich. And then we did another one of the amazing things, which was we retraced Adeline's escape route,
Wow.
uh,
Yeah.
which was, again, it just gave me a total sense of how it worked and what it must have looked like. And,
Mhm.
you know, um, it was invaluable. And to have Walter, who had been there,
Mhm.
walking me through it, it was just extraordinary.
About how long was that one stretch to freedom that you walked? About how long was she out where she could have been caught?
Probably like 3 kilometers, two and a
Wow.
half, 3 kilometers. It's pretty far.
Yeah.
And it's open, right? It's open like
Yeah.
farmland with these lanes going through it. And at one point, after she escapes, it becomes a hardened border. I mean, there
Mhm.
are tank traps, there are huge fences, there are dogs patrolling it. But after, the fall of East Germany and the reunification, that was all torn out.
Mhm.
There is a huge sign there that describes what it was like and how this was where the Iron Curtain began, right where she runs, is where they really started to fortify the Iron Curtain, not long after she makes her run.
Mm-hmm.
So it was instructive and eye-opening, and it gave me a real insight into who these people had to be as characters, not only from the boys' descriptions, but from the couple of interviews, long interviews, done by one of their daughters and granddaughters, and they're good. And then there was like an article written about them in the Bozeman Chronicle, I don't know, 35, 40 years ago on 4th of July, when she says, you know, my life is a miracle.
Mm-hmm. And it very, very much is. Do you think about what you would have done? Because I was thinking about the whole time reading the book. I was thinking about what my parents would have done. Would we have run? Would we have stayed? And I found that was something that was shifting through my head the whole time. Would I have had the
Yes.
courage? Would I have the
Yes.
courage that he left that prison and went on the run? Would I have the courage to go through that field that she was doing? And you realize you've got to have such an inner core to do that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
did you find yourself questioning as you were watching?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And that's one of the things I wanted the book to be about. I wanted to create these very difficult situations so vividly that the reader would start going, well, what the hell would I have done in
Yeah.
this situation? How
Yeah.
would I have reacted? You know,
Yeah.
would I have, of these two horrible decisions, which one would I have taken?
Yeah.
Right? Because other people in the story make decisions that they don't.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Other members of the greater family
Mm-hmm.
make different decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So it is interesting. It's very much like Beneath a Scarlet Sky in that respect, because, you know, I can't tell you how many readers have written me saying, the whole time I kept asking myself, would I have had that kid's courage?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you find yourself asking yourself the same thing about both the mom and dad in
Mm-hmm.
the Martel family in the story.
And he tells her, go west, I'll find you. And to just think about that moment of just saying, you go and I will find you at some point, with no communication like we have today. There's no cell phone. There's no phone. You don't know where you're going to find them, whatever. And the fact that they find each other, which we can actually say, because, you know, we know that happens in the book. The fact that they do find each other again is so stunning that all the pieces that have to come together in order to make that happen. And I just found like my heart was like swelling when I was reading that part, because I was just, this is what happens. Right.
And I learned that, you know, how did families reunify after, you know, the aftermath of the war? And there were these big lists that the Red Cross would put up in various cities, and they either got printed in your city or they didn't. And if you were lucky enough to find a list where one of your loved ones were, you could find them. But that's how you did it. But to get on that list, you had to actually go and make an effort to sign up to be put on the list. And then there was the, you know, what was the likelihood of Mr. Martel finally finding such a list, right? I mean, that's the way most people found each other, but it's still, you know, it's like considering where he's sent back to and where he comes all the way across and makes it, only to find out she's on the wrong side, right? She's on the wrong side of history and he's on the right side. And then to find her, it's just incredible.
Yeah, it was just one of those stories where you've also written with the pace of a thriller. And, you know, I've read your thrillers way back at the beginning. And I think your understanding of pacing is really what enhances your storytelling. And I tell that to readers all the time, because people say, oh, you know, I really don't love historical fiction. It drags. And I said, no. This has got a pace to it where you're hearing the research, like you're hearing that, but it's not being told to you. It's being constructed in such a way that's propelling the story forward. Is this something you work on when you outline, or does it happen later when you're doing the editing?
It happens during the actual writing, because that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to write about it, these situations, in a way that the reader sits right on the character's shoulder, and they get it. So there's an immediacy about it, right? That is good for making things go quickly, but also I do something that Patterson taught me, is cut out the boring parts. Take out, as interesting as they might be to me, right? Because I get totally enthralled with this world. I'm looking for the things that really will evoke something in the reader's mind. And I'm looking for those pivotal events, right? Without doing disservice to the grinding monotony of the journey that they went on, right? There is an aspect of that, but it can't get in the way of the storytelling, because my entire goal is to have a massive impact on the reader at the end of the book. That means I got to get them to the end of the book. That means I got to write this story in a way that is propulsive, that is, they cannot stop reading about somebody in a Conestoga wagon. I mean, you know, it's something that occurs at a slow pace, but I couldn't allow that to happen in the narrative, right?
Yeah. And it didn't at all. And you know, it's funny because I was going to ask you, because you co-wrote the number of books from Patterson. I was going to say, what did you take away from it? And that's exactly what you took away, is to cut out the boring parts. And believe me, there's nothing boring in this book, because even when you're sitting in the wagon, it's the child's in the back sleeping. This is what's happening. Or you're doing the internal monologue of them reflecting on the child they lost, reflecting on what has been left behind. So there's a lot of internal monologue that happens at that point, that it could be you're just in the horse and the horse is going along and the horse is this, but it's not, because you're hearing her caretaking her children and worrying about them and looking for the family and where they are and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also, they're each in their own way are forced to reckon with what they saw during the Holocaust. And this is kind of what haunts and drives them at a very deep level. And that was another thing I found fascinating about the story, is that it was complex. It demanded that I face things that were very unpleasant. I mean, in the extreme. But I just said to myself, nope, I can't ignore this stuff. It happened. I've got to basically deal with it head on. And again, because of it, that narrative force, right? The dramatic power of that backstory really fuels it on when they get split up.
Yeah, because then you're sitting there saying you're in his head and you're in her head, but you've already understood who they are. So you of course sort of say, like, what is she going to do? Because you bounce off each other when you're a couple. She has the strength, he has the strength. Now they both have to have the strength and they both have to do it. You've met them, but you really have to figure out how they're going to come together going forward.
Yes.
So has the family read the book? Like, what have they said about it? What have the brothers said?
They love it. They think it's amazing.
Yeah. So, you know, resilience is this theme in this book, and it's coming up again and again and again, of being resilient. I'm thinking of the last year during the pandemic, and everybody's so upset about, oh, we can't do this. Oh, we can't do that. And as I was reading this, like these people went through real hardship. I mean, we don't really understand what hardship is. Hardship is you don't know whether you're going to eat again. Hardship is you don't know if you're going to see your family again. Hardship is something happens to a member of your family and you watch it. And you have to fix it and get through that moment. That moment alone, you're also walking past people that are dead on the road. Like, you're a young child. And think about how many times in your life you've seen that. If you're an average person, very little. And this is a daily occurrence of what's going on. So there's this resiliency that I'm sitting there saying that it's this core thing that these people have to have had.
I agree. And that's one of the great lessons of the story is, you know, you get to go on a journey where you witness what four human beings are capable of enduring and overcoming. And the amazing thing is that, there's all this physical stuff. There's all these things they go through, this hardship, but the way they find through it is by relying on like the power of love for each other. They want each other to survive. Family, it's insanely important to them. It's the only thing that's constant about their life is their love for each other. And at the same time, they have this dogged belief, or she does, and he comes to have it, but she has it in this beautiful Green Valley. And she is going to get there come hell or high water.
Exactly.
You really feel that.
Yeah. Well, looking at the cover, it's like this very strong design. Was that the cover right from the beginning? Was that like right off the bat that that was what it's going to be?
Others may remember this differently, but it was my idea to take the design, or if you were to look at the graphic design of the beneath, which is a
Mhm.
triangle sticking up into the sky,
Mhm.
and we're going to flip it upside down for the valley. And
Oh, I love it.
then they took that idea and just blew it away. I mean, in ways that I couldn't have even fathomed. When I saw it, I was like stunned at how cool it was.
Mhm. Oh,
So,
I'm glad I have both covers back there because you see what you were talking about, your inverted
yeah,
V's. Totally great.
yeah.
Well, speaking of things staying the same, Will Dameron does a wonderful job of narrating, just as he did on Beneath the Scarlet Sky. He's like the voice of your work, I feel like at this point.
Yeah.
Have you ever met him? Have you talked to him at
No,
all?
but I want to, because the guy is really great. And the way he brings out, his interpretation of the characters' voices and the tension and stuff, I mean, he's an artist. And
Yeah.
I'm really lucky to have the guy doing it.
I was
So,
listening to it early today
fantastic.
and I was like, wow, that is the dead on voice. And then I went back and said, wait a second, I think he did Scarlet Sky as well. So that's
Yeah.
really great. So Scarlet Sky is being adapted into a series with Tom Holland. Do you have any more information on that you can share? Because I know the pandemic slowed everything to a grinding halt.
Everything to a grinding halt. Right. So Holland is in if it still meets with his schedule, because everything did come to a grinding halt. And he's the kind of actor who gets, Spider-Man and
Mhm.
huge budget, big tentpole films, and he's already signed contracts to do those. So I'm hoping he's in because he loves the story. But if not, we'll find somebody else.
Mhm.
There has been a pilot written. I've read it. It's really good. They don't tell the story in the same way that I do, but they're telling the same story.
Mhm.
So it's very cool. I like it a lot. And they are presently trying to cast the general.
Okay. Ooh, it's this moment where we lost so much out of Hollywood. We lost a whole year. And I keep saying to
Yes,
publishing, look, you were able to keep going. Everything else was, we don't know, we stop and start, we do this. LA was shut down for so long. And so
right.
much is behind the scenes on all that of it was supposed to be here, but who knows? You know,
Sure.
you close your author note with this very thought-provoking line. This is an American story, an immigrant story, a spiritual and a universal story. May we all dare to chase dreams, experience such grace, and lead such miraculous lives. And I so agree. And I think for reading this book and reading Scarlet Sky, you've given us all a chance to think of what courage is, to think about these bigger issues in life, what it was really like for these people, boots on the ground of what's going on. And when you think about your life and you think about what you're doing, it's so much bigger. And we're a lot of our parents and whatever our grandparents got to where they are today is because of people like these. And I think it's a
Yes,
moment to sit and reflect on that a lot more.
I do too. And I just finished the book. During the first draft of it that I turned in right around the time that the pandemic started to come on. And I remember thinking exactly that because I mean there was that initial like terror, what's really
Mhm.
happening,
Yeah.
what's real, what's this? And I remember saying, well, wait a second, if the Martels went through that, I can get through this,
Mhm.
and then my oldest son read the book, probably in this second or third draft, and that was the exact thing he kept saying is like, what I this is incredible what they went through. Who am I to bitch about wearing a mask and watching Netflix instead of going out to a bar, right?
Right.
And so it totally puts things in perspective. But
Mhm.
again, it also makes you realize what the human spirit is capable of.
Mhm.
Both the stories,
Mhm.
that's really what they're about. And
Mhm.
they are about this big theme of what is courage and what would I do and who am I as a person.
Mhm.
And I really want to provoke those kinds of discussions by
Mhm.
finding stories that inherently do this.
Mhm.
And they're out there. I mean, I
Mhm.
get people coming to me with lots of stories that ring of this nature.
Mhm.
What I'm looking for is the ones that really seize me. That because I figure if they move me and they inspire me, they heal me some way, and they transform me to think about life in a different way, then I'm in.
Then you're in. You're ready to go.
Yeah.
So are you on the hunt for the next story, or do you have it? And you don't have to tell us anymore. Like, do you have the story?
I have it.
You have it.
Yeah, it takes place in Africa about 17 years ago, 18 years ago. So it's not as long in the past, but it's there. And I'm going to Uganda to do all the groundwork on June 2nd, which I'm very excited about.
Wow.
I'm going with two very competent people,
I
former
hope so.
commander of SEAL Team 6 and a former CIA field operative who were the ones who actually found the story and brought it to me. And I'm thrilled to be writing it. It's another one of these stories that you just won't believe how big the human spirit can be.
Yeah. And what people actually can do. Well, we look forward to that, because it's nice to know there is one coming, that you're not just on the hunt for it and you're like ready to go. So
I am.
all good with me. And while I have you, your son Connor has a thriller, Sleeping Bear, that is coming out on July 6th. What's it been like for you watching him go through the publishing process?
It's been interesting, right? Because I'm at Remove, and now I've been publishing with Lake Union, which is an Amazon publishing group, and Connor is in New York with very capable hands controlling him, and he's getting, just a fantastic treatment. And I thought that cover was amazing.
Right.
I think what they're doing, promoting him, is amazing, and the fact of the matter is, it's one of the best debut thrillers I've read in years, and I'm not the only one who says this. Patterson read it, out of the blue and loved it, and Greg Hurwitz read it and loved it, and then Robert Crace read it and thought it was one of the best debuts he'd read in any kind that he read in a long time. So it's good.
I'm excited. I started reading it this morning just so I have a little flash before I sat there and started talking to you.
Okay.
Mark, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I don't get to do it often enough, but every
Yeah.
time I do, I learn something incredible, including standing in the back of the cocktail party and hearing the, initial kernels of the story, and then just where you take the stuff us from there. And it's just something that's such a pleasure to have as a part of my life.
Well, thank you so much. It was really great talking to you again, and I'm glad you love the book as much as I do.
No, absolutely. And to our readers, we look forward to talking to you next time on Book Reporter Talks To. Thanks for joining us today.